الله العلي الأعلى يقرئك السلام ويحسك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا ملحية ولا قمر منير ولا شمس مضية ولا فلك يدور ولا بحر يجري ولا فلك يسري إلا لأجلكم محبتكم وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم فهل تعذن لي يا رسول الله؟ فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وعليك السلام يا أمين وحي الله إنه نعم قد أذنت لك. فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوس هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله. فقال النبي والذي بعثني بالحق نبي واستفاني بالرسالة نجي ما ذقنا خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا محبين إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم يتفرقون. فقال علي إذن والله فزنا فاز شيعتنا ورب الكعبة. فقال النبي الثانية يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبي واستفاني بالرسالة نجي ما ذقنا خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا محبين وفيهم محموم إلا وفرج الله همه ولا مغموم إلا كشف الله غمه ولا تالب حاجات إلا وقضى الله حاجته. فقال علي إذ والله فزنا وسعدنا وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. جزاك الله خير. बाज़ सलवात भेजें. Now requesting Qiblat Tayab Moosvi for his series of his lecture for today is Ramadan 16. बाज़ सलवात.
Before we begin, please recite Surah Fatiha for the marhumin of the sponsors of tonight's iftar. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفرهم وارحمهم واسكنهم بجوار محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصينا معه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بهد الهمم ولا يناله غوث الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت محدود ولا أجل ممدود فترى الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالسخر ميدان أرض ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وحبيبنا وحبيب رب العالمين بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعن على أعدائهم أجمعين من أول يوم ظلمهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد فقال الصادق على محمد عليه السلام كل رياء شرك إنه من عمل للناس كان ثوابه على الناس ومن عمل لله كان ثوابه على الله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. One of the major sins, if you look at Shahid Dastaghaib's book, 40 Great Sins, And if you look at Sayyid Khomeini's 40 hadiths, one of the hadiths that Sayyid Khomeini talks about is a hadith in regards to riya, in a hadith in regards to showing off. And when you look at Shahid Dastagir's book and you read his book, 40 Great Sins, one of the sins that is in there is considered to be riya. But it comes under what? Shirk. Why does it come under shirk when it comes to the 40 great sins? Because one of the reasons is this narration that I started this lecture off with. Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, what does he say? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala. He says, Kullu riya and shirkun. Every type of riya is shirk. And then he goes on to say what? Innahu man amila linnasi kana thawabahu ala nas. Anyone who does any type of deed for people, then they should receive the sawab from the people. And then he goes on to say, anyone that does any type of deed for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will recompense them. So what is this riya? What is this showing off? Because when it comes to showing off, it can take different forms. Showing off riya in terms of ibadat. And that's the form it takes for the majority of us. Ibadat. And the ibadat, any type of ibadat. Ibadat in the form of namaz. Ibadat in the form of Quran. Ibadat in the form of Saum. Ibadat in the form of dua. Ibadat in the form of zikr. Ibadat in the form of azadari. Riya or showing off can take form in any of these ibadat. And when these ulama, they bring narrations, they say that this type of riya, this riya, is actually a sin. And not just a sin, but it puts a stain on your heart. Imam Muhammad Baqir, what does he say about sins? He says that every time an individual sins, he puts a dark spot on his heart. He puts a dark spot on his heart. And when he continues to sin, that spot grows bigger and bigger. And then there comes a point in time when that heart that was pure and light, it is complete darkness. Who's turned that heart into darkness? I have. Through my own actions, through the sins that I've committed. That heart was pure. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me a pure heart. But it was my own actions that turned that heart into darkness. The heart is the house of who? The heart is supposed to be the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's supposed to house Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not literally, but the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's supposed to be a house for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This heart is supposed to be a house for the angels, meaning all of that is good. This heart is supposed to be a house for everything that is good. But when you and I turn it into a house for everything that is evil, then how will the hidayat or how will the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala penetrate our hearts so we can see the right path? No, it becomes very difficult. The more sins that we commit, the more difficult it becomes for that light to penetrate. So if there's just one or two sins that we committed, it's easy that light can still penetrate. But if we've blackened our heart, if we've darkened our heart, the way Yazid did, the way Fir'aun did, the way all of these tyrants did, then even when hidayat comes, they will not be able to see it. Hidayat in the form of Nabiullah Musa alayhi salam. Hidayat in the form of Nabiullah Ibrahim alayhi salam. Hidayat in the form of Rasulullah. Hidayat in the form of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Hidayat in the form of Imam Hassan. Hidayat in the form of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Why? Because they've committed such atrocities. They've committed so many sins. Now their heart is completely darkened. And one of those sins that darkens your heart is Riyah. It's this showing off. Why? Because this showing off, the ulama, they say that if you're doing an act for the sake of a human being or for the sake of someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you've brought that person at the same level of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you do it for the sake of someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you've brought that person at the same level of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you bring someone at the same level of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is that? Shirk. Thank you so much. This is why you see in the 40 great sins of Shahid As-Saghaib, when he talks about shirk, tawheed and shirk in terms of the af'al of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tawheed and shirk in terms of the aqwal of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tawheed and shirk in terms of the umur or the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tawheed and shirk in terms of the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that section, he talks about riya. He talks about showing off. He's put it in the section of shirk. Why? Because this is what an individual is actually doing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says what? He says, O children of Adam, we have created everything for you, but we have created you for ourselves. Everything is for you, but you are for us. Meaning what? The ibadat that we do is supposed to be only and only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only and only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what do we end up doing sometimes? We end up seeing that, you know what, our friends are watching. Let's increase ourselves in our ibadat. Oh, you know what, our friends are watching. Let's do our dua with a bit more sadness. Our friends are watching. The rosas that we have, the fasting that we have. You know what, let's make it a bit more difficult on ourselves. Now you're not doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these amal, these are what are supposed to take you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you do them only and only for the sake of Him, when you start doing them for the sake of others, they're not taking you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, he says in that narration, what does he say? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. If you do something for the sake of others, then get the recompense of that from them. If you do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll get it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes I hear this. For example, in Azadari, Salat, Siyam, I hear this. When it comes to Azadari, what do I mean? Some people do matam harder. Habibi, he's not doing matam for you. He's doing matam for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Let him do it the way he feels comfortable doing it. That's it. When it comes to namaz, well, let's go to the sajda, let's make the sajda longer. The sajda isn't for you, the sajda is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let him do it the way he wants. This is where this riya, it creeps in. And Sayyid Khomeini, in his book of 40 hadiths, what does he say about it? He says, look, this sin, or this sin that not only blackens the heart, but it destroys the soul. Everyone needs to do their best to control this. And he has steps about how to go about to control it. The first thing he says is, if you're doing an act to please someone else, think about who that other person is. Think about who that other person is. That other person is a human being just like you. That other person is a sinner just like you. That other person cannot really benefit you. He can't. Why? Because everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing is of his own. Everything belongs to Allah subhanahu. It's not that that person can benefit you. What is he going to do? Just say, wow, look at this person. That's it. What does that benefit? Does that give you any benefit? No. So Sayyid Khomeini says, look at the person that you're trying to please. These people that you're trying to please, in what way are they better than you? Maybe the person that you're trying to please is worse than you. Then have you achieved anything by pleasing that person? No, you haven't. And he goes on to say, you have to remember that sometimes people want to please others. Why? Because they want to be loved. Because they want to be loved. They want to be loved by the society, for example. Correct? Sayyid Khomeini, he says, look, that loving of you is not in your hands. That's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also. That's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also. If He wants to put your love in their hearts, He can do it without you having to force it. He can do it without you having to force it. You have to remember, that's what he says. Sayyid Khomeini, he says that just keep that in mind. If you're showing off just to have your love in their hearts, know that it's not in your hands. Know that. What are you doing riyah for? One, this is for the people. Are you doing riyah for the people to show off in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If that's the case, then know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows your inner desires better than you know them themselves. Know that. Who do you think you're trying to fool? By elongating your sajda when you normally never do that. By elongating your ruku when you normally don't do that. No, you're not fooling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're only and only fooling yourself. That's it. When you're doing azadari, who are you trying to fool? Doing it harder. Let's just do it hard. No, do it what's comfortable for you. What did the Imam say? The Holy Prophet, what does he say when talking about Quran? The Holy Prophet says what? The amal that you want to do them when you feel like doing them. When that feeling leaves your heart, stop it. When you feel like reading Quran, read Quran. When that feeling leaves your heart, stop reading Quran. When you feel like reading namaz, mustahab namaz, wajib namaz is supposed to be read on time, so please just remember that. When you feel like reading mustahab namaz, read it. When you feel like making up your qaza prayers, read them. But while you're reading them, if you don't have khushu, if you don't feel like reading them, leave it. Leave it. Why? Because there's no khushu. You're not doing it just for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. The sweetness that you were feeling when you first started, it's not there. And the Holy Prophet wants you to continue to have that sweetness. When you want to do azadari, do it. When that sweetness of azadari leaves, then stop. That's how all of these amals are supposed to be done. For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the intention to receive the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the reward from others. To make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy, to make Imam Hussein happy, to make the Aima alayhim salam happy, not others. Because you have to remember what people do. You have to remember how people are. Today they're with you, tomorrow they're against you. Today they might be against you, tomorrow they'll be with you. Just look at the lives of the Masumeen. That's exactly how it was. They were with them one day, the next day, completely against them. With them in the time of the Holy Prophet, as soon as the Holy Prophet shuts his eyes, against them. This is how people are. This is why people of akhlaq like Sayyid Khomeini, they say, do not do these amal, don't do this to show off to anyone. Because the inners of an individual, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And Sayyid Khomeini, he goes into the different types of riyah. Riyah in terms of faith, riyah in terms of creed, riyah in terms of ibadat, riyah in terms of just being in a social gathering. And you see that in every one of these aspects, people end up committing this act. But the thing with us is we just think about riyah when it comes to just ibadat. But that's not always the case. Showing off. Let's say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you an ability that is better than everyone else's. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given someone a beautiful voice. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given a lot of people beautiful voices. There's no shak about that. And how do you use that voice? That's the question, correct? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you a beautiful voice. For example, the Qari of Quran till today that everyone listens to. Who is it? He was a Misri, Abdul Basit, Abdul Samad, correct? A very beautiful voice. But what was he using that voice for? For the Quran, correct? Reciting the Quran. If he was to use that voice for something else, what would happen? If he was to use that voice, but not read the Quran for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but just only and only show off to the people that I've been given this beautiful voice, do you think the reading of his Quran would have been accepted? No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. When it comes to, for example, him, I'm sure you're all aware, one of his sons, he became Shia. He was a staunch Sunni. In fact, when he went to Iraq, one of the Shias in Iraq, they told him that if you just recite the azan in your beautiful voice, I'll give you whatever you want. As much money as you want, I'll give it to you. He said no. He said, Abdul Basit, he said no. He didn't want to. He didn't want to recite the Shia azan. Everything that happened, he became famous, everything. He passed away. After he passed away, his son's interview should be online. His son, he became Shia. They asked him, how did you become Shia? Your father was like this. What made you become Shia? He says, look, I saw my father in a dream, and I see that he was crying. He was in a sad state. And I asked him, Father, why are you crying? Why are you in this state? It's because of you the whole world listens to the Quran. He goes, my son, you're absolutely right. I stuck to the Quran, but I left Ahlul Bayt. I stuck to the Quran, but I left Ahlul Bayt. He says, after I saw that dream, then I knew where Haqq was. And his son is also a Qari. He recites just like his father. What happened with him? He says, I left the Ahlul Bayt. I left Ahlul Bayt. Abdul Basid, Abdul Samad. This is how important the Ahlul Bayt are. Even a Qari of the Quran of that caliber, because of whom the whole world listens to the Quran, to this day, he says, I left Ahlul Bayt and that was a mistake I made. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But as the point I was trying to make was, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives an individual a blessing, correct? And they use that blessing not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They use that blessing to show off to people. To show off to people. And I use Abdul Basit, his voice. Let's use something that's more common. Some people are more wealthy than others, correct? What is this person using their wealth for? Is he using their wealth to show off to the other community members, or no? Are they using their wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? For the sake. These ni'mat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, how are you using them? You have to remember that riyah is not just in the form of ibadat. Showing off is not just in the form of ibadat. No. Showing off can happen in the social sense also. And wealth is one of those instances where people show off in society. They show off extravagantly. And what is going to happen to them? Not only will they be questioned about why they spent their money the way they spent it, not only will they be questioned about how they received or how they got the money, but they'll also be questioned about what happened to the money that you left after you left the world. What happened to all of that? How was it used? So instead, Sayyid Khomeini, he said, look, instead of worrying about making other people happy, instead of worrying about how other people feel, the only thing you should worry about is the act that you're doing. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala feel about it? The act that you're doing, how does the Imam of the time feel about it? That's all you have to worry about. Not anyone else. That's it. It's through the Imam of the time you will get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was able to achieve everything he did because of that connection. But a lot of the times we lose sight of this and we start trying to make other people happy. When in reality, we don't need to make anyone else happy except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When it comes to, for example, the dangerous effects of riyah, what are some of the effects of showing off? A lot of the times when an individual shows off, the people that he or she are surrounded by, what do? They do this person's tarif. Correct? They say, oh my goodness, look at what kind of a mu'min this person is. What does this type of idea, what does it do to this individual? It might make them feel that, yes, you know what, I've achieved such a high status. It starts putting what within them? Takabbur, thank you so much. It starts putting takabbur with, it puts that idea in this person's mind. I'm such a great person now. All these people, they're doing my tarif. And you have to remember that takabbur itself is a sin. But how did it start? It started with someone putting that idea in your head that you're such a great mu'min. And that idea, you just keep playing it over and over again. 1, 2. What continues to happen if these people, they do your tarif? You're going to be blind. You're going to be blind to the fact that the ibadat that you're doing, the action that you're doing is not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's for their sake. This is what Sayyid Khumaini says. He says, you have to remember, these are the pitfalls of riyah. The ultimate pitfall of riyah is where it leads you in the afterlife. Where will it lead you in the afterlife? Not just hell, but the lowest level of hell. Where the lowest level, there are levels of hell. One of the levels is Sijjin. That is the lowest, one of the lowest levels of hell. And Sayyid Khomeini says that what? They'll end up being in this place. And he himself, he says, you can't imagine the torment that happens in this place. You can't imagine the torment. So it becomes necessary for us to see, brothers and sisters, what is it that we're doing and how can we stop doing this? And as soon as it occurs, we need to stop. As soon as it occurs. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. One of the advices he gives is, he brings a narration from Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam and Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. He says that the Holy Imam, he says that whoever is desirous of meeting his Creator, he should perform virtuous deeds and should not ascribe any partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his worship. Seeking an explanation, when the companion asked for an explanation, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, a person who performs good deeds but not for the sake of being blessed with the vision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his aims or his acts are aimed at being considered as pious by the people, and he wishes that the people should know about his deeds, such a person is counted amongst mushrikeen. If this person is doing good deeds just because he wants to seem pious amongst the people, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says that this person will be counted amongst the mushrikeen. Correct? And Imam, he goes on to say that, look, there's none in the world that who've concealed their good deeds. There's none in the world who have concealed their good deeds, but later on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes people know about their good deeds. What do I mean? Look at, for example, the stories of the ulama in the last 50, 60 years. A lot of the, for example, some of the urafa, Ayatollah Bahjat, for example. Ayatollah Bahjat. In his lifetime, did he go around talking about all of his good deeds? No, he didn't. But after he passed away, then his good deeds started coming out into the world. That's what Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is saying. That's what he's saying. And then he goes on to say the opposite of people that have the opposite types. He goes, look, there are some people that will try to conceal their evil deeds as much as they can, but time passes on and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring about their evil deed and make it known to the world. And you see that that's also happened. People try to conceal their evil deeds, but later on, not all of them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not make all of their evil deeds. No, there's some deeds that will come out. You see that that's exactly what happens. You and I are not in control of what deeds people will get to know at the end or they won't. We have somewhat control of what? The actions, the acts, the deeds that we do. But once one or two people get to know the deeds that we do, then we don't have control over it anymore. Meaning what? It just takes one person to spread fire. You don't need 10, 20 people. So the good deeds that we do, keep them to ourselves. The evil deeds that you do, keep them to yourselves. Some people, as soon as they do a good deed, they go around like a big giant microphone and they start telling the community. For example, a moment they needed help. They helped the moment out. Instead of staying quiet about it, they need to tell the whole community, oh my goodness, I gave this woman, he came to my doorstep, I gave this woman this thousands of dollars. Why? In Islam, that's not what you're supposed to do. Oh my goodness, this moment he came to me and I gave him a job. You go, good, that's fine. Why do you need to let everyone know? You don't need to let everyone know the good deeds that you do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows. By being alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. By doing this, the good deeds that you've done, you're basically ruining them. You're ruining them. When it comes to the evil deeds, we try our best to hide them, but they come out. They come out. And they come out through who? Our best friend. They come out through who? People that we know. That's who they come out from. The people that we trusted, they're the ones that put out the news of our bad deeds. True or no? And these are the same types of people that what do we want to do? We want to try to make happy. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. One of the things, for example, Shahid Mutahari talks about, Sayyid Khomeini talks about, and Ayatollah Dastagir, they all talk about, is one of the ways to take out this type of feeling from within yourself is to completely submit. Submit your heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Submission, for example, Shahid Mutahari, he says, look, submission is of three types. There's submission of the body, there's submission of the mind, and then there's submission of the heart. And he goes on to describe, he says, look, submission of the body is the most basic form of submission. That's it. What is submission of the body? He gives an example. For example, if two people are fighting, one person wins. One person wins, correct? One person taps out, one person says, I give up. The body submitted, but that person's mind still has not submitted. And the youngsters that are in front of me, they all know. When you have rematches, why do we have rematches? You have rematches because the person that lost, their mind did not submit to that loss. That's why you have rematches. But Shaykh Mutari goes, look, the body has submitted, but the mind has not submitted. The mind still thinks, no, I could have won, I could have won. That's the weakest form of submission. Then he goes, the second is the submission of what? The mind. And he gives an example, submission of the mind can only be achieved through logic and reasoning. You can't beat a person and make them submit to the fact that 2 plus 2 equals 4. No, you have to give them logical proofs. That's submission of the mind. When you give them those type of logical proofs. The third, he says, is submission of the heart. It's when your heart submits, then your whole existence submits. Not just your body, not just your mind. But when your heart submits to something, that means that your whole existence is submitting to something. All three of these Maharaja, they say what? If you want that riyah to be out of your heart, then you need to submit your heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Submit your heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fact that you're wanting someone else's happiness means that your heart isn't submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yet. If it truly was, then their happiness would not matter to you. Whether or not they're happy about the amal that you do, no, that wouldn't matter to you. And this is where we need to be at. We need to look at these ulama, read what they say. One of the problems that we have, we read about the lives of the imams. Ulama, they come here, talk about the lives of the imams. They tell people to implement some of the stories of the imams into their lives. People say, well, they were imams. We can't do that. They're masoom. How are we? Okay. When they tell you and read to you about the lives of the ulama, and they tell you this is what they did, implement these good acts from their life, what's the excuse now then? There shouldn't be an excuse. The ulama themselves, are they masoom? No, they're not masoom. They're not masoom. So implement the good deeds that they've done. Take what they've said and implement it in your life. When, for example, Shahid Mutari, he says, clean your soul. Imam Khomeini, he says, clean your soul of everyone else but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's telling you how to go about to do it. If he wasn't able to do that, then how is he telling you how to do it? Correct? If he had not done it, how is he telling you what the steps are? If I have not made a computer, can I tell you the steps of making putting a computer together? No, I can't. I've never put one together. But if I have put a computer together, then yes, then I can tell you what the steps are to putting a computer together. The same thing with Sayyid Khomeini. If he had not given up riyah, then how can he tell us what the steps are to get rid of it? The fact that he's telling us the steps it shows that yes, he has already given it up. And because he gave it up, he was able to achieve everything he achieved. Shahid Mutahari, because he gave it up, he was able to achieve everything that he was able to achieve. Shahid Dasghi, because he gave it, he was able, all these urafa, all these ulama, they're able to achieve what they've achieved. Why? Because they've given it up and they've put their heart, complete trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their heart is only the house of God. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, chapter 78, verse number 40, and Sayyid Khomeini, he brings this verse also. And this verse, it has a different meaning to it too, where the disbelievers, وَيَقُولُ الْكَافِرُ يَا لَيْتَنِي كُنْتُ تُرَابًا, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the disbelievers on the Day of Judgment, they will cry out and they say, oh, that we wish that we were turab. We wish that we were dust. Correct? And inshallah, this has a deeper meaning to it too, esoteric meaning too. But what Sayyid Khomeini is saying here is that because of the sins of this riyah, these people that committed this type of shirk, this type of kufr, they would wish that they were just complete dirt, so none of this would be stuck on them. So none of these types of sins would be attributed to them. Why? Because of the punishment that they're going through. Because of the punishment that they're going through. What is the punishment for shirk? Everyone knows. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most famous narration. Every type of sin is forgivable except for? Every type of sin is forgivable except for shirk. Shirk is that sin where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish an individual. He will forgive everything else. But shirk, it has its different stages, different levels. And we're just talking about one part of shirk, which is riya. But shirk in terms of the umur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Shaykh Dasghib, he goes through all of that. Shirk in terms of the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shirk in terms of the af'al of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shirk in terms of the aqwal of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's all this different type of shirk. For example, shirk when it comes to the umur, the amr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given an amr, someone else gives an amr contrary to that, a command contrary to that, and you follow their command, leave Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, that's shirk. That's shirk. And on the day of judgment, alaykum salam, you will be asked about that. You tell your children to do something which is contrary to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if your children do it, you'll be held accountable for it. You'll be held accountable. And for the youngsters, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told you to do something, and someone else tells you to do the complete opposite, and you choose to do it, knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want you to do that, that's shirk. You'll be held accountable. This, inshallah, not this time, inshallah, some other time that I'm back, we'll talk about shirk, because shirk itself can be a topic for 30 days on its own. And the different forms of shirk. How shirk is appearing in society today. It's not just in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that, you know what, we brought, for example, this person at the level of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No. Shirk can take on different forms. And today, the form that it's taking on in the society is what? What rules everyone now? What's been ruling everyone since before? Money. They'll do anything and everything for money. Money has become society's God. And there's a narration from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam when it came to the Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala when the first coin ever was minted, the first coin, Shaitan, he looks at that and he says, I'm going to make this everyone's God. I'm going to make this everyone's God. I'm going to make everyone deviate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this. And you see that's exactly what's happened. Money has become the God of the individuals. And it's through money that everyone deviates from the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this day and age, it's money that we've made above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is a form of, which is itself shirk. But that's why I said, talking about shirk, that can take 30 days itself, because there's so many different forms and there's so much nuances. But I only have about 2-3 minutes. I know it's almost Maghrib time, and I've already told everyone, please, when you come to the center, please come with wuzu, so there's more time for me and less time between my speech and time for Maghrib, because I want my speech to end maybe 5 minutes before Maghrib and everything will be set. But when it comes to, brothers and sisters, when it comes to this idea of how do we get this riya out of us, I already explained in the beginning. Sayyid Khomeini explains in his Sharh al-Hadith the steps to get rid of it. The first thing everyone needs to do is what? Is remember that the people that you're trying to please, they're not really worthy of your pleasure. They're not worthy of your pleasure. The only person that's worthy of your pleasure is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All these ulama, they say just keep that in your mind, and this idea of wanting to show off will continue to die down in your heart. Will continue to die down in your heart. Just keep that in your mind. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He keeps us on the path of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He forgives our sins. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He forgives all the sins of all the mu'mineen, mu'minat that are gathered here tonight. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He forgives the sins of all the marhumeen, mu'mineen, mu'minat that do not have anyone to pray on their behalf. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And once again, brothers and sisters, please recite Surah Fatiha for the marhumeen of all of those that sponsors tonight's iftar. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفرهم وارحمهم واسكنهم بجوار محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Take it off 2 minutes early?
That's fine.
According to that time?
You're fine.
I think I'll come back.
Majlis Shahadat Imam Majlis Imam, inshallah, is happening Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Majlis start time is 5:45. Please remember the time is 5:45. आप लोगों की पाबंदी रखें ताकि हम अपने मजलिस को वक्त पे खत्म कर सकें.